So let's talk about 2026. That was the year the world basically got rewired. One single crisis set off this massive chain reaction, a cascade of shocks that just tore through everything: our economy, our financial system, our technology. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how it all went down, piece by piece, domino by domino.
And it all kicked off right here. You're looking at a single line from a news update back on April 18th. And honestly, this is the sentence that pretty much captures the exact moment the world tipped over the edge. See, this wasn't just some other regional skirmish you'd see on the news. No, this was the flashpoint, the single spark that started a global fire.
So, the first link in that chain? An incredibly aggressive maritime blockade right near Bandar Abbas. And we're not just talking about something that targeted one country. This move effectively severed one of the planet's most critical commercial arteries. The fallout, both military and humanitarian, was immediate. And wow, did things escalate fast. The blockade completely choked off Iran's key export routes, which led to direct military clashes. For pretty much everyone else, the Persian Gulf became a zero-insurance zone. What does that mean? It means commercial ships just stopped going there. Traffic ground to a dead stop. And that put the delivery of basic supplies, we're talking food, medicine, for the entire region at serious risk.
And the human cost was just staggering. Immediately, the UN reported that 1.5 million people were displaced across the Levant and the Gulf. And you have to remember, that's not just a statistic on a screen. That's a massive, unfolding humanitarian crisis happening in real time.
Okay, so here's the thing. A military crisis in a place that's critical for energy, it never stays local. Ever. So no surprise, this blockade triggered the first huge economic shockwave. It started in the global energy market, and from there, it just slammed right into heavy industry.
And the result of that? Well, Brent crude oil hit $117 a barrel. But here's the really crucial part. It stabilized there. The key word is stabilized. This wasn't some temporary spike that was going to come back down. Nope. It settled in at this historically high price, sending a crystal clear signal to the world. A huge chunk of our energy supply was offline, and it wasn't coming back anytime soon.
The knock-on effects were, you guessed it, immediate. Just take a look at the Eurozone. You've got these industries that just gobble up energy, like chemical production, heavy metals, and their output just plummeted to decade-long lows. When energy costs stay that high for that long, factories have no choice. They slow down, they furlough workers. The real physical economy was starting to seize up.
So you have the industrial shock. From there, the contagion jumped, just as you'd expect, right into the financial system. Now, you got to understand, the global economy was already sitting on this absolute mountain of debt. It was a fragile situation. And this new crisis, it started pushing that structure right to its breaking point.
I mean, just look at that number, $315 trillion. That's the total global debt burden we were dealing with. This was the system's pre-existing condition, right? So when the shockwaves from the energy crisis hit, the cost of just paying the interest on all this debt, it suddenly became a critical point of failure for the entire global system.
And that led to something called a liquidity squeeze. The easiest way to think about it is like a global bank run. All the money that keeps global trade moving, it just froze. Investors panicked and all rushed for the exits at the same time, trying to get their cash back. All of a sudden, physical cash was incredibly hard to find, right at the exact moment everyone desperately needed it.
And you could see the signs of stress absolutely everywhere. The U.S. 10-year Treasury yield, which is a major benchmark for, all of global finance, it stayed super high as investors just fled to the perceived safety of the U.S. dollar. The problem was, central banks couldn't really do much. With inflation already a problem, they had very little room to cut interest rates. So the entire market was just holding its breath. Everyone was waiting to see if the people in charge could actually stop a full-blown financial meltdown.
Okay, but in the middle of all this chaos, a completely different kind of player started making a huge strategic move. The tech sector. They saw all this geopolitical volatility and instability, and they responded with this really fascinating defensive play. They started pouring massive, and I mean massive, amounts of money into AI infrastructure.
And their goal here was crystal clear. This wasn't just about building more cool AI toys. No, this was about something much bigger. It was about insulating their digital infrastructure from the chaos of the physical world, specifically insulating it from the wild swings and volatility of the global energy grid.
And they had a pretty clear step-by-step plan to get it done. Step 1, prioritize building new data centers in places that are politically and geologically stable, like North America and Northern Europe. Step 2, plop those data centers right next to super stable power sources. We're talking nuclear and hydroelectric. And then, for the final step, they decided to get into the energy game themselves, deepening partnerships with nuclear providers and even funding the development of new modular reactors to lock down their power supply for good.
And if you're wondering why they'd go to all this trouble, well, this number explains everything. 96 gigawatts. That was the projected energy demand for AI infrastructure by the end of the year. The power demand was just astronomical. The only way they could reliably meet it was to basically take control of their own energy destiny.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the most permanent consequence of this whole crisis. A great rewiring, if you will, of the actual physical routes of global trade. And I want to be clear, this wasn't just a temporary detour. This was a fundamental redrawing of the world map.
And the scale of this change is just immense. Look at this. 72% of the trade that used to flow through those key Middle Eastern routes was now permanently rerouted. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Nearly 3/4 of all the traffic on one of the world's most critical shipping arteries, it's just not coming back. Ever. So what does that look like in practice? The new normal for shipping goods from Asia to Europe is now a journey that takes an extra 14 days, all the way around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. And that extra time and, of course, that extra cost, it's not viewed as a temporary headache anymore. It's now just a baked-in, permanent feature of how global trade works.
And this really represents a complete shift in philosophy. The old model, just-in-time manufacturing, which was all about maximum efficiency and minimal inventory, that's dead. It's been replaced by a new model, just in case. And this new way of thinking is all about resilience. It means building up regional inventory, and it means accepting that secure, reliable shipping routes are more important than the absolute cheapest ones. It's really the end of Globalization 1.0 and the birth of Globalization 2.0.
Which leaves us with one last really critical question. The world, after 2026, was forced to rewire itself. It chose resilience over pure efficiency, and you could argue it's a safer, more robust system now. But it's also a slower and more expensive one. So as we move forward in this new reality, we have to ask ourselves, what is the real long-term cost of all this newfound security?